Motorsport provides an inherent amount of risks and challenges for drivers and teams. But what gets often overlooked is the fact that for the organizers of your favorite events, it isn't always smooth sailing. Economic turmoil, safety concerns, cars that are too slow, cars that are too fast, circuit infrastructure, fan attendance, logistical nightmares, the list goes on and on. Hosting a racing event is a complicated task that has an immense financial risk attached to it, because if nobody comes to watch your event or even participate in it, you've got yourself an issue. None know this better than the organizers through the years of the 24 Hours of Spa-Francorchamps. Ever since its inception in 1924, the 24 Hours of Spa has been one of the biggest endurance races on the calendar. Directly inspired by the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which had its first race held just a year prior in 1923, the 24 Hours of Spa saw some of the greatest car brands in the world take on humble local Belgian car brands like Minerva, Nice, Speedsport and Excelsior. Le Mans may have been the big one, but piggybacking off of its success by allowing the same cars that raced Le Mans to race at Spa as well proved to be an excellent decision by the Royal Automobile Club of Belgium. This rise in endurance racing popularity was dealt a heavy blow due to the economic recession in the late 30s and then a fatal one with the advent of the Second World War. The intense fighting at the Battle of the Bulge quite literally changed the landscape of the Belgian Ardennes and its motorsport scene. In the wake of the war, 24 Hours of Le Mans managed to reignite the passion for endurance racing, but Spa never really managed to recover to the same levels. It's the Belgian racing ace Paul Ferreira in the early 60s that had provided the Spa 24 its second lease on life. Together with his friend, the Belgian-Italian Lucien Bianchi, he had raced a near-stock Citroën at the 1961 12 Hours of the Nürburgring. He noticed that fan attendance for this touring car race was high and figured why they didn't have this kind of race in Belgium. He met up with the Royal Automobile Club of Belgium and together they cooked up a rule set by essentially copying what the 12 Hours of Nürburgring was doing and doubling the race duration. The 24 Hours of Spa was back as a touring car race. Since spectators could now root for the car they themselves drove to the track with, there was an almost instant rise in popularity. The new rules also set the race apart from its early rival, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. While in France, Jaguar, Ford, Ferrari and many more were building increasingly complicated purebred racing machines, Spa was host to the cars of the common folk. There was an inherent connection between the fans by the side of the track and the drivers and cars on the track. The new cars may have brought back much sought after increase in competitors and spectators, but they didn't stop Spa's major other problem, track safety. Numerous fatal accidents and boycotts from drivers refusing to take their increasingly faster cars on the track finally saw it go from a street circuit to a dedicated closed course in 1979 with the introduction of the new layout. By now the 24-hour race had attracted more and more international attention, as the battles on track mainly consisted of armies of BMWs and Ford Capris racing against a healthy collection of sports cars and the occasional American V8. The implosion of the European Touring Car Championship in 1988 and its neatly organized rule set meant that the Spa 24 was again in choppy waters. The race was still popular, but the organizers now had to make their own rule set to keep the manufacturers coming. With touring car racing slowly losing popularity, the grid arguably lost a bit of quality. The Super Touring era briefly brought a bit of allure back to the race, but the increasing cost and total domination of BMW meant that the 24-hour race had to reinvent itself once more if it were to stay relevant. From a grid filled with econoboxes in the year 2000 to an armada of big power exotic monsters in 2001, GT cars were now the main focus of the race. The 2000s saw the greatest GT cars on the planet duke it out in the Ardennes forest. Big power brought with it big crowds. The Maserati MC12, Dodge Viper, Chevy Corvette and Porsche 911 became the poster boys for what was now the biggest GT race of the year. A sudden crisis due to another implosion of the championship, that of the FIA GT, caused some dramas, but SRO's Blancpain Endurance Series and the well-grounded and solid GT3 foundation it brought with it finally provided stability for the event. Since then, the Spa 24 has been neatly incorporated in the Intercontinental GT Challenge and has been one of the pillars of the wider endurance racing calendar. You see now that the 24 Hours of Spa has had some major challenges throughout the years, most of which unique to the event. But in 2020, it and the rest of the racing world would face an issue on a global scale: the pandemic. It's quite frankly a miracle we've had any sort of motor racing in the year 2020, but when we did, it was mostly without any spectators around. Pit crews and paddock personnel were under strict guidelines having to wear face masks at all time. These rules also extended into race control, which had an effect on how the race was gonna go. Usually, there is a small army of stewards, officials, and dedicated marshals for track limit infringements. On paper, it's an easy thing to control, as it's clearly defined by the 2 white lines on the edge of the track. If your car goes fully outside those white lines, you get your lap time deleted. But this year, the number of officials was significantly downsized, to the point that only Eau Rouge and Radillon were able to be kept an eye on. It is the most dangerous corner complex after all, so it was a priority. Everywhere else, track limits would not be enforced, so if you went wide, you faced no consequences. The organizers and officials just hoped that drivers wouldn't take things too far, which went about as well as you think.
Way off the road, there goes Chris Froggatt getting Blanchimont wrong, and that's going to compromise the run to the bus stop, but he was way over the curb. 25th, let's just talk him over the line, but coming way wide out of the bus stop. What about track limits there, John?
I took the very words out of my mouth. I mean, I've already noticed a number of cars going completely off.
Augusto Farfus then coming out of the chicane. Where's he going? Way wide over the curb. Gets it back onto the circuit, but exploring all of the limits there. Coming up to the Cour Paul Frere, but the Audi rides the curb well, and it's a good job because he's even wider there.
Well, that, Kevin, is, you know what, that is going beyond the Call of Duty. Well, you know, that's getting away with it, and that'll probably get checked a lot more when we get into the race. Now known as the Paul Frere Courbe. I mean, Albert Costa is a bit of racetrack and a bit of runoff. Well, let's all run off and racetrack. All blends into one.
Them all. The car right now is 15th. Andrea is fresh into it, but he's another one going wide there at Speaker's Corner.
Oh, right. Oh, where has he gone? What sort of exit is that out of the chicane? Are these guys serious? Are they serious with that exit out of the chicane? Oh, dear me. Where's race director? Get him in!
When you give race car drivers an inch, they will take a mile. Almost every corner on track had its exit curbs abused to an absurd extent. Due to the high-speed nature of Spa, extending the racing line well beyond the usual track limits, therefore making your lap longer, was negligible because of the massive amounts of speed you were now able to carry out of the corner. In the final Superpole session before the race, most GT3 cars were acting like rally cars, bouncing around over the curbs and getting dangerously close to the walls, especially at Speaker's Corner and the bus stop chicane. It was ridiculous, but also extremely dangerous. There's a reason why the runoff areas at some of the highest speed corners on track like Blanchimont are as big as they are, because if, or rather when, a car loses control, it would have plenty of extra room to either correct itself or slow down before hitting the wall. When you use that runoff area as the racing line, you now have less runoff. Just like cars, tracks have to be homologated too. Due to the extreme overextending of the corners, they were essentially changing the entire layout of the track and running outside of the homologated parameters. The drain covers too weren't designed to take this much abuse. Something clearly had to be done, because if this were to go on during the actual race, it would only be a matter of time before there's a massive accident. The track safety issue of the 60s, which prevented racing to happen, was rearing up its head again. In the evening after Superpole, the SRO and Spa24 organizers held an emergency meeting and decided enough was enough. Next Saturday morning, hours before the race was about to start, they laid down the law. An extra 11 officials from the Royal Automobile Club of Belgium were drafted in solely to help with the track limits issue. For the race, they would be enforced again, everywhere. Furthermore, you'd only get 3 warnings per car, not driver, before getting a drive-through penalty. With Spa's pit lane for the 24-hour race being combined with the old pit lane, that's one long drive-through. It did the trick though, as the race looked like an actual professional event again and not a racing game open lobby. Just a couple of years later, Spa's runoff zones were completely revamped. The extra runoff at Radillon took all the attention, but thanks to the gigantic gravel traps now all around the track, we won't be seeing any track limit shenanigans like the ones in 2020 return anytime soon. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe if you don't want to miss out on the next one.